wasn't around for the beginning of this process. Could you talk a bit about how this opera got started?
The opera actually started in 2018 when Roy Stevens and I came into new leadership positions with Opera Modesto. And one of the first things that Roy did was to commission a brand new opera. He reached out to Dr. Deborah Kavasch, who's an esteemed composer who happens to live in our area, and asked her to write something new.
Why did you need a new opera?
Good question. I mean, there are so many operas out there already. But the reason we needed something new was because we had started a new program called the Summer Opera Institute for teens. And we really needed something that was perfect for those young voices, but also had high musical values and had great storytelling. I think we discovered that there actually isn't a lot of repertoire that meets those three requirements.
We came up with the idea of The Tortoise and the Hare, which was a piece that had been I had collaborated on with Bunney-Sarhad. She had written the poem, I had set it to music, and we thought this would be the perfect combination, that she could write the libretto for this new opera.
My assignment in writing the libretto for the race was to take 5 Aesop's Fables and to make a mashup. First of all, in doing the writing, I had to make sure that the audience understood each story, because everyone doesn't know Aesop's Fables as much as we think they do. And certainly not everyone has known all the stories that we dealt with. So I had to tell the story, and then little by little, I had to bring them together, and that was the trick. I've always been a word person, and I spend a lot of time reading and studying words, learning other languages. So when it came to writing the race, it was easy to use a great number of different kinds of words, but what really made the difference was the decision to make it a rhyming piece. Because when you're just writing, you don't always have access to all the words that you actually know. But when you have to find a rhyme, you're going to come up with some pairings that are a little crazy sometimes, but that really work. And so I went with that.
So often the first step when you're working on a new work, such as a new opera or a new play, is to have a workshop. Mm-hmm. And the workshop is a chance to try some things out, to test out the waters and see how things are going. So we did have that opportunity in the summer of 2019 with our Summer Opera Institute. And really the best thing about it was, by doing this workshop, everybody learned something about how we wanted to make the opera move forward, how we wanted it to evolve and progress. And that was very, very valuable. The next step was a premiere of the entire opera that was planned for the Summer Opera Institute, but it turned out that COVID came along that year. And so we were bound and determined to hold our Summer Opera Institute, but there was no way we could have a brand new opera mounted at the same time. But then it occurred to us that the race was a perfect story to be made into a movie, because we could film it outdoors. And we had just spent the summer working with these young kids with our Summer Opera Institute program, and we knew that we had all of the singers to fill these roles wonderfully.
But, I mean, what we lacked was someone to help us do the filmmaking and do the recording of the music. I mean, we don't know anything about that.
No, none of us had any filmmaking experience.
Yeah.
And so we were very fortunate to come across the Creation Lab and Mike Everett, and he has a wonderful award-winning recording studio, and he's made so many movies. And even though he'd never done an opera before, he was totally game to become our partners in this project and to help us to make this movie.
But the ramp up for this project was wild.
Oh, yes.
it was so fast. For context, the last time I directed for Opera Modesto, I was hired about a year ahead of time, and so I had time to really study the score and let it percolate, let the ideas come naturally. For this project, I listened to the score for the first time on a Monday evening, then on Wednesday morning, so a day and a half later, the two of us and Roy Stevens, the general director, went to the creation lab to pitch the project, and once we reached an agreement, we started hiring people and casting people literally on the car ride home. And we had our first meeting with the cast a week later on a Tuesday, and we were rehearsing it the next Saturday, and I think we recorded the orchestra like 2 weeks after that. It was nuts.
Crazy.
Directing the race presented a lot of challenges to overcome. Of course, there was the challenge of doing this safely in a pandemic, but also, I mean, the opera was written for the stage.
Of course.
And so I had to figure out how to transfer it from the stage to film, which is a really different medium. So it was also, though, important for me not to focus just on what we couldn't do, because we couldn't do it live, and because we were doing it in a pandemic. It was important to me to focus instead on what I could do, what the opportunities were, since we were doing it on film. One of the other things for me was I knew that costumes would be really key to defining the visual language of this piece, because we didn't have any sets or not very many props. So I was so lucky to get to work with Kaylani Gleave, who is a phenomenal costume designer out of LA, as well as a specialist in speed sewing, which was perfect for the kind of timeline we were on.
That was helpful.
But she was also really able to understand what I was going for, in that I wanted to evoke the animals, but not go super literal with it. And together we decided on this concept of pulling from all these different time periods. Because the thing about Aesop's Fables is they were written in antiquity, and they've been applicable in every era since then.
True.
One of the nice things about this being filmed is we really get to kind of play with some of the costume elements of opera that we don't normally get to play with, because traditional opera costumes are meant to be seen from far away, so you lose some of the really small details. But where we get to film it, and we'll have some close-ups, we really get to immerse ourselves in those small character-specific kind of touches. Because this is part of the literary initiative, I thought it would be awesome if all of the animalistic elements and some other elements of the costumes looked like they were made out of paper. Aesop's Fables is one of like the earliest published. I mean, it's very old, like it dates back to antiquity, and it's kind of been a beloved classic throughout the eras. So I think kind of bringing that in and really making it look as though these fables have really jumped off the page and kind of come to life. So that's how we'll approach some of like the ears or the antlers or the hair ears especially, but then also throughout the costumes, I'd love to add like some script and some other little touches throughout the clothing so that it really looks like you're kind of being pulled right out of a page and like into the world.
Welcome everyone to the sporting event of the season, the race between world champions Liisa the Hare and newcomer the Tortoise.
The rehearsal process for the race was unusual, to say the least.
To say the least.
Because we had to do almost all of it on Zoom, which required a lot of imagination.
But one of the things that helped us tremendously was how we were able to cast.
Right. That was really key for my blocking, was having these groups of families and also just some quarantine pods, friends, boyfriend, girlfriend groups. That allowed me to have people close together and touch in the blocking, which was really the key to making it all work. And then for the music, we were able to work with those people as groups, which really created the foundation for the music that when it eventually came together.
Especially on those tricky harmonic parts.
Right, and that was especially key because they only ever had one in-person music rehearsal. One. And that was actually the same day they got to try using the swords for the first time.
Oh, right.
It was exciting.
So here we are at the McHenry Bowling Alley in Modesto. We had expected to rehearse our Buzzketeers and their Errol Flynn-style sword work, rapier work outdoors in a huge backyard because of the COVID crisis. However, today we have hazardous, dangerous level of air pollution because of the terrible fires in California and Oregon. Therefore, it's more dangerous to be outside than it is to be inside. So our friends that own the McHenry Bowling Alley, the Garrett and Dallas Marsh, have allowed us to come in here. So as you can see, it is completely shut down, except for us. We are rehearsing in the former coffee shop with the Buzzketeers and their rapier work, but our combat master, J. Tyler Jones, is in Washington, D.C., and we are in California. So that is happening by Zoom.
And feel free to go, yeah, that was lovely. Tracing the line of her body like that was absolutely right on. Okay, so he's gonna swipe, give a big paw swipe, and you can duck that. Boom. And then my two bees that are just upstage of him there, I'm pointing, and I don't know why I'm pointing at the screen. You can't see where I'm pointing. But the two bees.
Mike, have you ever made a film of an opera before?
No, I haven't. This is my very first time. I'm a newbie, and so don't expect a lot.
We expect top quality in every possible way.
Yeah, I've done a lot of music videos, so this is probably the closest, but I've never done an opera.
This is practically like doing a Nashville music video.
Yeah, it's about 6 times longer.
One of my favorite ideas that you brought forth in this production has to do with the bees.
That's one of my favorites too. So this came out of the fact that yes, there they are, the bees. I had this big problem of with the bees. I mean, how do you sting somebody when you can't touch them? And I was turning this problem over and over in my head, and eventually, like middle of the night, I had this epiphany. So we had these 3 main bees, and I had this idea that they could be the 3 musketeers, and they could have rapiers for stingers, and that just turned into this whole big thing, what we ended up calling the Buzzketeers.
All for one and one for all.
And it was so much fun, but it was a big challenge for the performers, because doing stage combat, handling weapons, it takes a lot of practice and a lot of skill to do it safely.
And none of them had any experience
No,
in that.
not at all.
It's a different experience because at like one point I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and then at the same time I'm doing things that I didn't know I could do, so it's kind of a new feeling.
Now thrust to his right hip. Moulinet to the downward slash. Good. Duck. Jump. Nice.
This was my first opera, but this was a challenge to write an opera that would be for young singers, that was supposed to be for a large number of singers, that was anticipated, many of whom would be female. But Roy asked if I would be able to write the roles in such a way that they could be interchangeable, that it could be a male or a female voice. So there were a lot of things to take into consideration, and it was an amazing challenge, and I had so much fun doing this, but it was so interesting to see how it eventually got cast, because many of the characters I thought would be female ended up being male, and it was great.
was a little daunting to take on a premiere. I've done that a few times, mostly for singing, but now first time for conducting. And I approach this music the way I approach all music. I always listen to it as a whole and get to know the piece, the range of the piece, dynamically, musically, and then I get into the details of learning each section. And it was very exciting work to me because I love score study and to really understand the music from the inside out. And it was also a benefit to be able to work on a piece with a living composer that I could send her questions. We don't have that opportunity in opera very much. And so that was really a thrill and a benefit, and it was such a positive experience.
One of our more interesting challenges that we had to conquer in the music was this idea of the extended vocal techniques.
And could you just define that for us?
Well, it's pretty simple actually. It just means anything sort of unusual that you would not normally find in music. But it has to be made by the voice. So it could be clicking, it can be buzzing, it can be roaring, it can be many different kinds of things. And Deborah happens to be a specialist in this sort of musical device. And it was so perfect for what we were doing because it added all the sounds we needed for those animals.
Yeah, so in the bees, it's called ululation. And it's, I'll just demonstrate it. It's, if you're like in the lower register and you're not very high, it's like zzz, and it's just a very quick movement where your tongue hits at the front and you're just quickly moving.
But it's not just buzzing. Show me just a regular buzz, like yeah. So it's not just that.
Yeah, but then you've got your 3 lines, your ululation over your note, and it's and it's real quick and real. It's like a punch of a bzz. And then it's the same if you're a lamb. You're gonna get in your throat. It's different. The frogs, that's all out of, it's a random rhythm, so you're just ribbit.
Because of COVID, we had as few people as possible in the room, and so we had one whole weekend with the musicians recording their part first. 3 different sessions of hours of rehearsal, and then the following weekend recorded one group of singers on Saturday all day long, and another group of singers on Sunday. And so to get all of this coordinated took great effort and careful planning and great collaboration between everybody involved to make sure that we had one unified sound, even though we were separated for most of that time. So conducting in the recording session was really different than being in normal situations for us because there was so many new things around. Headphones, microphones close to the faces for the singers, microphones directly close to the instruments, and the nerves were high. And for the singers particularly, they need to be able to act as much as they could as though it were their actual performance, because this is what they will be acting to when they are doing the filming portion. It was really so exciting to hear the recording come together for the first time.
One of the keys to the success of the movie was finding the right location. We were very fortunate to find a place right here in the Central Valley of California where we could tell these different stories, these 5 different stories of the different animals in different settings, and they were all so close to one another.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, 95% of what you see in the movie is within walking distance.
Right.
I mean, we only had one weekend of in-person on-location rehearsals before we filmed. So we were all a little worried about translating what we've been doing on Zoom to the real world.
True.
But it went amazingly well. I mean, I think we only had to reblock one scene. But, of course, there were a couple glitches along the way.
Oh, yes.
And then it was finally time to film.
Hurrah!
It was kind of a rush to get there. We had been there to set up all these big tents for dressing rooms and hangout zones. The costumes were being rush shipped up from LA. I think they got there like 9:30 the night before we started filming. So we'd done all this stuff, all this preparation, and then somebody got sick. It was one of our cast members, and we didn't know whether it was COVID. We didn't know whether it was a cold or a flu instead.
Right.
And this was the day before we were set to start shooting, and we had to make the call to cancel our first weekend.
But then we monitored the situation over that week, and fortunately it turned out that it wasn't COVID, and it was just a cold, and she got over it, and there was a lot of scrambling to make a new schedule.
But we made it. We had a lot of other weird things happen.
Right. Like the river.
Like the river. I mean,
the river.
Okay, so where we had rehearsed with the frogs the couple of weekends before, when we went back to shoot that scene, apparently some sluice gates had been opened or something upstream because that part of the river was flooded. The river was 3 or 4 feet higher, and so we had to last minute redistribute the frogs, do a different area so that they weren't, actually swimming. It was quite an exciting time, but it worked out.
It worked out.
We got through it, and it turned out really wonderfully.
The Race was the first opera that I ever wrote for. I had never had the experience of seeing my characters come alive. I had heard my words sung when Deborah's music was performed, but really when I was composing the libretto, in my mind I saw the characters kind of as cartoon characters or even stick figures, and the experience of actually seeing the characters come to life when these wonderful young singers did what they did, I really had tears in my eyes because they were alive. They were much more than I had ever dreamed they could be, and it was a wonderful experience.
Working on this production brought us so much joy
Yes.
to be able to do. It was fall of 2020. All of us had not been able to work in theater for months. All of our performers were attending school on Zoom, having to quarantine, and being able to have this project.
What a great project to pour our creative energies into.
Absolutely. It brought us so much joy, and we're hoping that now through subtitles and translations and
the internet,
we'll be able to spread a little bit of that.
And share it with new audiences.
Yes.
All around the world.
Exactly.
We hope you enjoy it. Hey, did I ever show you how to do that ribbit of the frogs?
I don't know if...
You have to inhale. You have to inhale. Take a good breath and you go... Ribbit. Try it. Try it. Okay. That's pretty good. Okay. And try the sheep. They're really easy.